Good evening and welcome to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer, and tonight's topic is the Quran and women. What does the Quran have to say about the status and the dignity of women? And how does that compare to our understandings in Christianity and in the West in general? Two Quranic scholars, Amatul Rahman Omar and Abdul Manan Omar, wrote an article recently called Introduction to the Study of the Holy Quran. And in it, they say this: the concept of some Christians about the rights of women in Islam is based on colossal ignorance of the teachings of the Quran and Islam. And now I am happy to announce that I am in full agreement with those two Muslim scholars. I am in absolute agreement with the fact that the idea that many people have, Christians and non-Christians alike, about the status and the role of women in Islam is based on colossal ignorance. But the question is the ignorance on the part of those who believe that the Quran is a marvelous progressive tract advancing women's rights, or those who believe that the Quran has been and is used all too often to justify the oppression of women? Now, to find out first, let's look at the 81st chapter of the Quran, which begins with a stark litany of the cataclysmic events of the Day of Judgment. And it says this: when the sun is overthrown, and when the stars fall, and when the hills are moved, and when the camels big with young are abandoned, and when the wild beasts are herded together, and when the seas rise, and when souls are reunited. The image that follows immediately after that is this: and when the girl child that was buried alive is asked for what sin she was slain. Now, both Muslim and non-Muslim apologists for Islam point proudly to this passage to show that the Quran put an end to the practice that was supposedly common among the pagan Arabs of female infanticide. And indeed, this is a minor preoccupation of the Quran. In another place, the book excoriates those whose faces become darkened when they receive news of the birth of a girl, and who consider burying her beneath the dust. Verily evil is their judgment. That's chapter 16, verses 58 and 59. Allah also tells the Muslims, slay not your children because of penury. Now, the same apologists often make sweeping claims about the Quran's supposedly benevolent teachings on women. Late in 2005, the English judge Marilyn Morrington spoke in Islamabad at a seminar entitled Violence Against Women and Criminal Justice System, Challenge and Response. Morrington stated that Islam is a religion which lays emphasis on giving women their due rights. Yes, she really said that. Similarly, the US-based Muslim Women's League asserts that spiritual equality, responsibility, and accountability for both men and women is a well-developed theme in the Quran. Spiritual equality between men and women in the sight of God is not limited to purely spiritual religious issues, but is the basis for equality in all temporal aspects of human endeavor. Well, that's very impressive, but we have to ask then, is it true? Certainly former British Prime Minister Tony Blair would agree, as he once remarked, to me, the most remarkable thing about the Quran is how progressive it is. The Quran is inclusive. It extols science and knowledge and abhors superstition. It is practical and far ahead of its time in attitudes toward women, marriage, and governance. Yes, he really said that. Even Allah himself is cited as a supporting authority for all this, assuring the believers in the Quran that never will I suffer to be lost the work of any of you, be he male or female. All will be rewarded. Whoever works righteousness, man or woman, and has faith, verily to him will we give a new life, a life that is good and pure, and we will bestow on such their reward according to the best of their actions. It's chapter 16, verse 97. And it seemingly gets even better. The Quran says that Allah created men and women from a single soul. Many Muslims in the West have pointed to this verse as evidence that Islam recognizes the full dignity of women. A 20th century Iranian Shiite scholar, Ayatollah Murtada Matahari, says that other religions also have referred to this question, but it is the Quran alone which in a number of verses expressly says that women has been created of the species of man, and both man and woman have the same innate character. And then he quotes that verse. But once again, other verses and traditions undermine the Quran's ostensibly progressive injunctions. In this case, the single soul from which mankind was created was Adam's, and while the biblical story of Eve's creation from Adam's rib is not repeated here, the Prophet of Islam refers to that story in a hadith, suggesting that while men and women may have the same innate character, as the verse says, created from a single soul, the Quran says, that does not mean that they are equal in dignity. Muhammad says that women are crooked. Woman has been created from a rib and will in no way be straightened for you. If you wish to benefit by her while crookedness remains in her. And if you attempt to straighten her, you will break her, and breaking her is divorcing her. Women are inherently crooked. This is the words of Muhammad. Certainly some Muslim clerics think so also, or at least they don't believe in legal equality for women. Bangladeshi Islamic cleric Mufti Fazlul Haq Amini read the same Quran that Tony Blair found so progressive, and yet complained about attempts in his native country to establish equal property rights for women. The problem, he said, that would be directly against Islam and the Holy Quran. Now, where do Muslims get such ideas? How is it that they don't seem to be reading the same marvelous book that Tony Blair read? Actually, there is in the Quran an overwhelming sense that women are inferior. That the Quran actually specifically refutes the idea that women have the same basic human dignity as men do. To the contrary, Allah says in the Quran that men are superior to women. When giving regulations for divorce, Allah stipulates that women have rights similar to those of men over them in kindness. Similar, but not identical, for men are a degree above them. It's chapter 2, verse 228. Also, in chapter 4, verse 34, the notorious wife-beating passage to which we will return later, it says that men are superior to women. Far from mandating equality, the Quran portrays women as essentially the possessions of men. The Quran likens a woman to a field, tilth, to be used by man as he wills. Your women are a tilth for you to cultivate, so go to your tilth as you will. In a tradition, Muhammad details the qualities of a good wife, including that she obeys when instructed and that the husband is pleased to look at her. The Quran decrees women's subordination to men in numerous other verses as well. Chapter 2, verse 282 declares that a woman's legal testimony is worth half that of a man. Get 2 witnesses out of your own men, and if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women, such as you choose for witnesses, so that if one of them errs, the other can remind her. It allows men to marry up to 4 wives, and also to have sex with slave girls. If you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with orphans, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be able to deal justly with them, then only 1, or a captive that your right hands possess, that is, a slave girl. That will be more suitable to prevent you from doing injustice. That's chapter 4, verse 3. The Quran also rules that a son's inheritance should be twice the size of that of a daughter. Allah directs you as regards your children inheritance to the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females. Chapter 4, verse 11. It allows for marriage to pre-pubescent girls, stipulating that Islamic divorce procedures shall apply also to those who have not yet menstruated. That's chapter 65, verse 4. Even some passages that appear to benefit women don't actually end up doing so on closer scrutiny. The Quran requires a husband to give his wife a dowry. The wife, however, may choose to free the husband from this obligation. If the wife gives him part or all of that dowry with a good heart, her husband is allowed to take it. In reality, this supposed choice is often forced upon women and justified by this Quranic verse. These passages are by no means archaisms or dead letters. They're imposed wherever Islamic law is enforced, as in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where large numbers of women turned out during the June 2009 post-election demonstrations. Clearly, these women's grievances went far beyond a single rigged election. One explained, "I see lots of girls and women in these demonstrations. They're all angry, ready to explode, scream out, and let the world hear their voice. I want the world to know that as a woman in this country, I have no freedom. I have no freedom. Now, this was not surprising, since Iranian law was formulated in scrupulous adherence to the Quran and Islamic tradition and law. Even the Ayatollah Khomeini's granddaughter, Zahra Eshraghi, declared that under Islamic law, a woman is there to fill her husband's stomach and raise children. And just weeks after President Barack Obama defended the right of women in non-Muslim countries to cover their heads, brave Iranian women were throwing off their head coverings as a sign of protest against the Islamic regime, without a peep of support from Obama, of course. Journalist Azadeh Moaveni, author of the feminist book Lipstick Jihad, noted that while it's not at the top of women's grievances, the hijab is symbolic. Taking it off is like waving a red flag. Women are saying they're a force to be reckoned with. Now, that is a force to be reckoned with only insofar as the Islamic Republic authorities would allow, and as we saw, that was not very much. They were guided by Quranic imperatives, and those Quranic imperatives are by no means favorable to the rights of women. Laying out rules of evidence. The Quran directs those trying to make a legal case to get 2 witnesses out of your own men, and if there are not 2 men, then a man and a woman, such as you choose, for witnesses, so that if one of them errs, the other can remind her. It's chapter 2, verse 282. Muhammad, in a hadith, used this verse to argue that women were deficient in intelligence, as well as in religious faith. According to this hadith, Muhammad was on his way to offer prayer when he passed by a group of women, and he stopped to exhort them to charity, basing his exhortation upon a warning. He said, "O women, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you," that is, were women. As to explain his extraordinary statement, Muhammad responded, "You curse frequently, and you're ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you." When pressed further, Muhammad invoked Quran chapter 2, verse 282, and said, "Is not the evidence of 2 women equal to the witness of 1 man?" When the women admitted that this was indeed the case, Muhammad drove his point home. "This is the deficiency in her intelligence," he said. "Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses?" When they admitted this also, he concluded, "This is the deficiency in her religion." Now, of course, he had made those rules, or at least according to Islamic tradition, he had made those rules, and so he was simply reflecting what he himself already believed. But now these things have become, as far as Muslims are concerned all around the world, the unalterable word of Allah. Such attitudes enunciated by Muhammad himself are pervasive and corrosive all around the Islamic world. And for women, it only gets worse. A Muslim man may divorce his wife simply by saying, "Talaq," I divorce you. But unsurprisingly, women may not divorce their husbands in this way. After a Muslim husband tells his wife that he's divorcing her, the Quran directs that divorced women shall wait concerning themselves for 3 monthly periods in order to determine whether or not they are pregnant. If the divorcing couple has children, they ordinarily go with the father, and he owes his wife no financial or any kind of support at all. During the 3-month time span, the husband have the better right to take them back if they wish for reconciliation. Women shall have rights similar to the rights against them according to what is equitable, but as we have seen, the Quran says men have a degree of advantage over them. Talaq, it's that easy. And that very simplicity, obviously, gives rise to abuses, some of which the Quran itself anticipates. A man may, after all, pronounce talaq upon his wife in a fit of temper and then reconsider. Accordingly, the Quran says that a divorce is only permissible twice. After that, the parties should either hold together on equitable terms or separate with kindness. That's chapter 2, verse 229. Now, this passage seems to envision marriage, or at least for Muslim women, as something akin to a hostage situation. For the Quran goes on to direct that if the couple would be unable to keep the limits ordained by Allah, then there is no blame on either of them if she gives something for her freedom. Or in the translation of Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall, one of the most prominent English translations of the Quran, it says, if she ransom herself. But after 3 talaqs, the divorce is irrevocable. That is, 2 divorces are allowed. A husband can say to his wife, I divorce you, and then take her back. And he can say to his wife again, I divorce you, and take her back. But if he says it the 3rd time, then the divorce is irrevocable. He cannot take her back until a certain condition is met. After a man divorces his wife 3 times, he cannot, after that, remarry her until after she has married another husband and he has divorced her. That's the Quran, chapter 2, verse 230. This has led to the extraordinarily strange phenomenon of temporary husbands. That's right, temporary husbands who marry and divorce thrice divorced women at the behest of Islamic clerics so that these poor women can then go back to their original husbands. Now, this very strange practice is sanctioned by no less an authority than Muhammad himself. A woman once came to him with an unusual problem. She had been divorced by her husband, had married another man, and now wanted to remarry her first husband, but her second husband was impotent. Muhammad was unyielding. He told her that she could not remarry her first husband unless, he said, you had a complete sexual relation with your present husband and he enjoys a complete sexual relation with you. Now, predictably enough, this very strange requirement has resulted in all manner of abusive situations. In India, in 2006, a drunk man divorced his wife 3 times. Afterward, he tried to keep his rash talaqs a secret, but word got out in the village, whereupon the local Islamic clerics declared the divorce binding and stipulated that he and his wife could not lawfully reconcile until she married and divorced another man. In the Maldives, just a few years earlier than that, a temporary husband spent the night with his new wife only to renege on his agreement to divorce her after one night, much to her fury and to the dismay of her original husband. Now, not only are there temporary husbands, there are also temporary wives, at least for the Shiites. As strange as this all may sound, this too is based on the Quran, or at least so the Shiites insist. The Quran in chapter 4, verse 24, it says, and those of whom you seek content by marrying them, give unto them their portions as a duty. And there is no sin for you in what you do by mutual agreement after the duty has been done. Now, this is kind of an obscure passage rendered in obscure language in English, but from the phrase, what you do by mutual agreement, Shiite Muslims have gleaned permission to enter into marriages that have a time limit. The couple may marry one another for one night, or a weekend, or a month, or any limit that they choose. One hadith stipulates that a temporary marriage should last for 3 nights. And if they like to continue, they can do so, and then if they want to separate, they can do so. In a temporary marriage, the duration of the marriage is specified at its beginning, and after it ends, the couples part. It's just temporary. It's a complete ordinary marriage, but it's just for an afternoon, or a night, or a weekend, or something of this kind. Now, not surprisingly, temporary wives are often found in seminary towns, such as the holy city of Qom in Iran, where many lonely young men with a bit of money can be found easily. One young seminarian, as a matter of fact, in the early 1900s, recounted in his diary his experience with a woman that he had married for a while. After he paid her and the marriage expired, he remembered the experience with satisfaction and made a most arresting and illuminating comparison. He said, it is reported that the imams have said that whoever makes love legitimately has in effect killed an infidel. That means killing the lascivious spirit. How reassuring for infidels. The Quran also takes child marriage for granted in its directives about divorce, discussing the waiting period required in order to determine if a woman is pregnant. It says, if you are in doubt concerning those of your wives who have ceased menstruating, know that their waiting period shall be 3 months. The same shall apply to those who have not yet menstruated. Allah is thereby giving instructions for a situation in which a prepubescent woman is not only married, but is being divorced by her husband. Now, of course, such a verse might have made its way into the Quran, because of the Islamic traditions about Muhammad himself marrying a child bride. According to Sahih Bukhari, the hadith collection that Muslims consider most reliable, the Prophet married her when she was 6 years old and consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old, and then she remained with him for 9 years, that is, till his death. Now, another tradition recalls that at the age of 9, she was playing on a swing with some of her friends when Muhammad came for her. This behavior by the man whom hundreds of millions of people believe to be the exemplary standard of conduct has brought suffering to untold numbers of women and girls. One Islamic land where child marriage is common, in fact more common than anywhere else in the world, is northern Nigeria, where Islamic law is in force. The Nigerian government has tried to stamp out this practice, passing a law in 2003, the Child Rights Act, that set the minimum age for marriage at 18. However, who do you think are the fiercest opponents of that law? You guessed it, Muslim clerics. Islamic clerics have fiercely opposed this law setting the marriageable age of women at 18. Imam Sani, a Nigerian cleric, explained, child marriage in Islam is permissible. In the Quran, there is no specific age of marriage. Consequently, he said, the Muslim clerics have a problem with this Child Rights Act, and they decried it. They castigate it, they reject it, and they don't want it introduced in Nigeria. If the government enforced the law, said Imam Sani, there will be violent conflict with the Muslims, saying, no, we will not accept this. We'd rather die than accept something that is not a law from Allah. Now, Nigeria is made up of 36 states, and up to this point, 18 of them have passed the Child Rights Act. However, only one of Nigeria's majority Muslim states has passed the law, and that with a change that set puberty, rather than the age of 18, as the minimum requirement for a lawful marriage. The result? As many as 800,000 Nigerian women are afflicted with fistula, a disease resulting from early intercourse and pregnancy. Nigeria is not alone either in the prevalence of child marriage or in attempts to end the practice. In September 2008, Moroccan officials closed 60 Quranic schools operated by Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman al-Maghrouhi because he issued a decree justifying marriage to girls as young as 9. The Sheikh, said a report in AFP, the French news agency, said his decree was based on the fact that the Prophet Muhammad consummated his marriage to his favorite wife when she was that age, and that is indeed reported in numerous hadiths. It should come as no surprise, then, that given the words of the Quran about divorcing prepubescent women and Muhammad's example in marrying Aisha, that in some areas of the Islamic world, the practice of child marriage enjoys the blessing of the law. Time magazine reported several years back that in Iran, the legal marriageable age for girls is 9 and for boys 14, and notes, quote, the law has occasionally been exploited by pedophiles who marry poor young girls from the provinces, use and then abandon them. In the year 2000, the Iranian parliament voted to raise the minimum age for girls to 14, but this year, a legislative oversight body dominated by traditional clerics vetoed the move. Likewise, the New York Times reported in 2008 that Yemen, despite a rising tide of outrage, the fight against the practice is not easy, that is, the practice of child marriage. Hardline Islamic conservatives, so called by the New York Times, whose influence has grown enormously in the past 2 decades, defend it, pointing to the Prophet Muhammad's marriage to a 9-year-old girl. Of course, the characterization of proponents of Islamic law as conservatives is very common, but it's notable, it's kind of ironic, because the people who oppose the spread of Islamic law in the United States and elsewhere in the West are likewise also characterized as conservatives. So for the mainstream media, you're either a conservative if you want Islamic law and are adhering to it and trying to bring it to the West, and you're also a conservative if you oppose Islamic law in the name of freedom and human rights. In any case, child marriage remains prevalent now in many parts of the Islamic world. In 2007, the photographer Stephanie Sinclair won the UNICEF Photo of the Year competition for a wedding photograph of an Afghan couple. The groom was said to be 40 years old, but he looked about 60 if you look at the picture, and the bride was 11. UNICEF patroness Eva Louise Kohler explained, "The UNICEF photo of the year 2007 raises awareness about a worldwide problem. Millions of girls are married while they are still underage. Most of these child brides are forever denied a self-determined life." According to UNICEF, about half the women of Afghanistan are married before they reach the age of 18. The Quran also allows a man to take as many as 4 wives, so long as he believes that he can, quote, deal justly with all of them. For according to one hadith, Muhammad said, "The person who has 2 wives, but is not just between them, shall appear on the day of judgment in such a condition that one half of his body will be collapsing." Nonetheless, what's just, what constitutes just behavior, is in the eye of the beholder. And Muslim theologians have noticed that the Quran says that one must treat one's wives justly, not equally. That is, Ibn Kathir surmises that this requirement is really no big deal at all. It is not obligatory, he says, to treat them equally, rather it is recommended. So if one does so, that is good, and if not, there's no harm. Muhammad Assad, a 20th century convert from Judaism to Islam, who translated the Quran and annotated it with a very Western-oriented slant, pointed out this justified the inequality between men and women nonetheless, and he did so by pointing to biological realities. One might ask, he wrote, why the same latitude has not been given to women as well, that is, for allowing for women to have multiple husbands just the same way as men can have multiple wives. But the answer, he says, is simple. Notwithstanding the spiritual factor of love, which influences the relations between man and woman, the determinant biological reason for the sexual urge is in both sexes procreation. And whereas a woman can at one time conceive a child but from one man only and has to carry it for 9 months before she can conceive another, a man can beget a child every time he cohabits with a woman. Thus, while nature would have been merely wasteful if it had produced a polygamous instinct in woman, man's polygamous inclination is biologically justified. Enjoying divine sanction, polygamy is legally practiced in a majority of Islamic countries worldwide. Now, this also results in a certain dehumanization of women and reduction of them to the status of commodities. We're going to take a break at this point, and we'll be back after it with more on polygamy and on the status of women in the Quran in general. This is the ABN Show with Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch, and we'll be right back after this.
You are watching ABN.
Hi, this is David Wood from Jesus or Muhammad. As I'm sure you've heard, ABN has some significant financial needs. A lot of the equipment here is either outdated or damaged, and it's affecting the broadcast. I'll say ABN does a great job with what they have, but they could be doing much more if they had some newer equipment, some newer cameras. And so I encourage everyone to support the work that's going on here. We'd like to have more broadcasts, more shows, more programs, and we can only do that through financial donations. And so I encourage everyone out there to contribute whatever you can. And beyond all of this, apart from the technical needs, there's also the security needs given the increase in threats. And so if ABN is going to continue carrying on this work, they're going to need your support as they always have. And so as as we end out the year and you're thinking about where you'd like to donate, I don't think you'll find a better place than ABN.
Welcome back to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm your host, Robert Spencer, and today we are discussing women in the Quran. And we're in the middle of a discussion of polygamy with the sanction that it is given in the Quran. It is noteworthy that not only is polygamy legally practiced in a majority of Muslim countries, but also with large-scale Islamic immigration to the West, polygamy is increasing in Europe and in the United States as well, with estimates of polygamous arrangements reaching up as high as 16,000 in Italy alone. Britain appears to be a bit behind the curve. The Toronto Sun reported in 2008 that the British government recently admitted that nearly 1,000 men are living legally with multiple wives in Britain. Legally. That is, legally, because the British government knows about it, doesn't do anything about it, and is actually even considering legalizing it officially in order to be able to tax it. It is perhaps unsurprising that polygamy is vociferously defended in the West by some Muslim immigrants. In 2004, the Islamic Cultural Center of Norway, which receives money from the Norwegian government, declared that polygamy is advantageous and ought to be practiced where conditions lend themselves to such a practice. What does come as a rude surprise, however, is the blithe acceptance of the practice by supine, politically correct Western governments. In February 2008, for example, the British government made it acceptable, legal, for men with multiple wives to claim extra welfare benefits. North America is not exempt from this. In Canada, Mumtaz Ali, president of the Canadian Society of Muslims, spoke approvingly of the spread of polygamy, declaring in 2008 that polygamy is a regular part of life for many Muslims. Ontario recognizes religious marriages for Muslims and others. He said that there were several hundred Muslim men practicing polygamy in the Toronto area. Quranic polygamy has also come to the United States. In November 2007, a Muslim woman sent a letter to the board of directors of the Islamic Center of New England, complaining that her husband was able to marry illegally and secretly and without my knowledge 3 American Muslim women. And because of that, myself and my children have suffered and are still suffering tremendously. She laid some of the responsibility for this directly at the feet of the leaders of the Islamic Center. She said to them, because of the failure of the Islamic Center, as well as the imams, to prevent such misconduct, I had no choice but to file for divorce. She threatened to, quote, expose this misconduct in court and the media if I have to. I also hope through this letter that you will make sure that this victimization doesn't happen to any other sisters. Now, this was no isolated case. According to researcher David Rusin, estimates for the United States typically run into the tens of thousands of polygamous unions. In May 2008, researchers estimated that between 50,000 and 100,000 Muslims were living in polygamous arrangements in the United States. And Muslim imams don't seem concerned about U.S. laws forbidding the practice. Ibrahim Hooper of the Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group, the Council on American Islamic Relations, asserted that a minority of Muslims in America were polygamous, and that Islamic scholars would differ on whether one could do so while living in the United States. He didn't say anything about the necessity of obeying U.S. laws in this regard. Toronto Imam Ali Hindi explained that such laws would have no force for Muslims anyway. He said, this is in our religion, and nobody can force us to do anything against our religion. If the laws of the country conflict with Islamic law, if one goes against the other, then I'm going to follow Islamic law. Simple as that. Now, it's interesting to note that not only can a man marry as many as 4 wives, but he can also divorce them at will and marry others, and can also own slave girls. And we saw recently an Islamic politician, an Islamic cleric rather, in Egypt, and an Islamic so-called feminist in Kuwait, both justifying this practice and calling for it to be revived in a large scale among Muslims today, that they would capture and enslave infidel women for the purpose of sexual slavery. It sounds absurd, it sounds beyond belief, but these are Muslim spokesmen in Muslim countries saying these things in broadly viewed fora and not being called on the carpet by anyone for doing so, because it's in the Quran. It's also noteworthy that the Quran envisions not only will men be polygamous, and not only will they be able to take advantage of slave girls, but also, of course, the blessed people who die will enjoy other women in paradise. Although the Quran says that women who are righteous will go to paradise as well, paradise for women is never described. We never hear what's in store for them. But paradise for men is described several times in the Quran. Verily, for the righteous, there will be a fulfillment of the heart's desires, gardens enclosed, and grapevines, and voluptuous women of equal age. It's chapter 78, verses 31 to 33. Another, and they will be honored in the gardens of delight, on couches facing one another. A cup from a gushing spring is brought round for them, white, delicious to the drinkers, wherein there is no headache, nor are they made mad thereby. And with them are those of modest gaze with lovely eyes, pure as they were hidden eggs of the ostrich. Chapter 37, verses 42 to 49. Chapter 44, verse 54 says, we shall join them to fair women with beautiful, big, and lustrous eyes. Chapter 55, verse 56, there are those of modest gaze, whom neither men nor jinni will have touched before them. Chapter 56, verses 35 to 38, we have created their companions of special creation and made them virgin, pure, and undefiled, beloved by nature, equal in age, for the companions of the right hand. It's interesting to note that there was a very formidable and pious Catholic priest, Charles de Foucauld, who had lived his early life as a libertine and had indulged greatly in the pleasures of the flesh, and later became a monk in the desert in North Africa, dedicating his life to prayer for Muslims and to trying to convert Muslims to Christianity. And he was ultimately murdered there by Muslims. But in any case, in speaking about Islam, at one point Charles de Foucauld said that he knew that it was not the religion from God because he had tasted the pleasures of the flesh. He knew they were not the ultimate happiness. He knew they were not the ultimate fulfillment for the human soul. And yet he knew that that was what Islamic paradise offered to people. In contrast to the New Testament, which says, St. Paul says, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him, in 1 Corinthians 2:9. And so in Christianity, it's very different. That the pleasures of heaven, the joys of being in the presence of God, are so great as to be indescribable. And there's nothing like this crude and lascivious vision of an eternal bordello that we see in the Quran. And then there is, of course, wife beating. There is no basis, says Kanta A. Ahmed, author of In the Land of Invisible Women, a female doctor's journey in the Saudi kingdom. She says there is no basis in Islamic theology to support domestic abuse of any kind. It all depends, however, on one's definition of abuse. Wife beating exists in all cultures, but only in Islam does it enjoy divine sanction. The Quran tells men to beat their disobedient wives after first giving them a warning and then sending them to sleep in separate beds, a punishment that suggests that the Quran regards women as sexually insatiable and needing to be kept under control. Now, this is, of course, an extremely controversial verse, and so it is worth noting how several translations render the key word here, because many people claim, Islamic apologists in the West claim, that where the verse says to beat a disobedient woman, that it doesn't actually mean beat. However, every translation, almost without exception, of the Quran into English, those made by Muslims, those made by non-Muslims, they all say some variation on beat them. That is, beat the disobedient woman. Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall says, scourge them. Abdullah Yusuf Ali says, and last, beat them lightly, but that lightly is not in the Arabic. It's worth noting that Pickthall and Ali are the authors of the two most prominent translations of the Quran into English. One that comes out of Saudi Arabia and reflects the Wahhabi ideology is that of Al-Halali and Khan, which says, "And last, beat them lightly if it is useful." But here again, that lightly if it is useful is not in the original Arabic. Shakir says, "And beat them, Sher Ali, and chastise them. Rashid Khalifa, then you may, as a last alternative, beat them. Arthur Arbery, and beat them. Rodwell, and scourge them. George Sale, and chastise them. Muhammad Assad, and beat them. And N.J. Dawood, and beat them." In a new widely publicized translation of the Quran, however, Muslim feminist Lale Bakhtiar translates it as "go away from them." In light, however, of that unanimity among translators that I just outlined, both Muslim and non-Muslim translators of the Quran, this seems difficult to sustain. It's hard to believe that all those authorities on Quranic Arabic, spanning several centuries, got the passage wrong until Lala Bakhtiar came along and set them all straight. But her impulse to mitigate the brute force of this verse is certainly understandable, if not accurate, as many Muslims regard it today with acute embarrassment. Muhammad Assad, for his part, in his always Western-oriented commentary on his translation of the Quran, adduces numerous traditions in which Muhammad, quote, "forbade the beating of any woman," concluding that wife beating is barely permissible and should preferably be avoided. Unfortunately, however, this is not at all a unanimous view, not even close to a unanimous view. In his Quranic commentary, Ruhul Ma'ani, Sheikh Syed Mahmud Alusi gives 4 reasons that a man may beat his wife. He says this: if she refuses to beautify herself for him, if she refuses sex when he asks for it, if she refuses to pray or perform ritual ablutions, and if she goes out of the house without a valid excuse. All that, says this commentator on the Quran, is grounds for beating one's wife. What's more, the propriety of wife beating is reinforced in the Hadith. Western propagandists for Islam like to point to a Hadith in which Muhammad held up a miswak, a toothstick, an Islamic toothbrush, in response to a question from his followers about the proper tool, the proper implement that one should use to beat one's wife. Apparently he was brushing his teeth when they approached him. But in practice, Muhammad does not always counsel such gentleness, and the early Muslims didn't practice it. Muhammad's favorite wife, Aisha, the child girl that he married when she was 9 and he was 54, said it herself. She said, she said according to a hadith, "I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women." Muhammad was once told that the women have become emboldened towards their husbands, whereupon he gave permission to beat them. He was unhappy with the women who complained, not with their husbands who beat them. Also, Aisha reports that Muhammad himself beat her. And remember, Muhammad's example is normative for Muslims, since he is, as the Quran says, an excellent example of conduct, according to chapter 33, verse 21. Once, Muhammad went out late at night after he thought that she was asleep, and Aisha followed him surreptitiously. Muhammad, however, saw her, and Aisha recounts, "He struck me on the chest, which caused me pain, and then said, 'Did you think that Allah and His Apostle would deal unjustly with you?'" Many influential Muslims take all this very seriously. In spring 2005, when the East African nation of Chad tried to institute a new family law that would outlaw wife beating, Muslim clerics protested that the measure was un-Islamic. And how could it not have been un-Islamic when the Quran itself says that one may beat one's disobedient wife? A 2007 survey of hospital workers in Turkey, now mind you, this is Turkey, which at least up to recently has been held up as a beacon of Islamic moderation. Hospital workers in Turkey found 69% of the women and 85% of the men agreed that under some circumstances a husband was justified in beating his wife. Among the acceptable circumstances were criticizing the male, As many as 20% of women, even in the formerly moderate land of Tunisia, are victims of spousal abuse. In September 2007, the Islamic cleric Muhammad al-Arifi explained on Saudi and Kuwaiti television, in line with the three-tiered approach counseled by Quran chapter 4, verse 34. Remember, first give them a warning, then send them to separate beds, then beat them. This cleric said this: admonish them once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 10 times. If this doesn't help, refuse to share their beds. And if that doesn't work, al-Arifi asked his audience. One man replied, beat them. That's right, al-Arifi responded. And where did they get this? Well, of course, they got it from reading the Quran, reading it in Arabic and understanding that that is exactly what the Arabic word meant. Then al-Arifi explained the parameters. He said this: beating in the face is forbidden, even when it comes to animals. Even if you want your camel or donkey to start walking, you are not allowed to beat it in the face. If this is true for animals, it is all the more true when it comes to humans. So beatings should be light and not in the face. If he beats her, the beatings must be light and must not make her face ugly. He must beat her where it will not leave marks. He should not beat her on the hand. He should beat her in some places where it will not cause any damage. He should not beat her like he would beat an animal or a child, slapping them right and left. In January 2009, Australian Islamic cleric Samir Abu Hamza likewise echoed the Quranic injunction. First of all, he said, advise them. You beat them, but this is the last resort. After you have advised them not to be disobedient, for a long, long time then, you can smack them. You beat them. And please, brothers, calm down. The beating that Muhammad showed is like the toothbrush that you use to brush your teeth. You are not allowed to bruise them. You are not allowed to make them bleed. But unfortunately, that toothbrush story, it contradicts the hadith that we just read about how Muhammad struck Aisha on the chest and caused her pain. If Muhammad did it, in Islamic tradition and law, it is right and it is worthy of emulation. Men also have differing views of what constitutes a light beating. We see that in several translations of the Quran, the translators have added in the word lightly after beat them, even though that word lightly is not in the Arabic. But what is lightly? How much is too much? How much is not enough? What's a heavy beating and what's a light beating? These things are subjective judgments. A prominent American Muslim scholar, Dr. Muzamil H. Siddiqui, former president of the Islamic Society of North America, has said that in some cases a husband may use some light disciplinary action in order to correct the moral infraction of his wife. The Quran, he said, is very clear on this issue. Indeed it is. Allah also mandates that women be held under house arrest, that home imprisonment until death, unless Allah ordain for them some other way, for women found guilty of lewdness or zina on the testimony of 4 witnesses. According to Islamic law, these 4 witnesses must be male Muslims. A woman's testimony is inadmissible in cases of a sexual nature, even in rape cases in which she is the victim. If a woman is found guilty of adultery, she is to be stoned to death. If she's found guilty of fornication, she gets 100 lashes. Now, why should a woman be stoned to death for adultery? It is noteworthy that the Quran does not actually say that a woman should be stoned to death for adultery. The Quran just has this bit about the lashes. So where does this come from? Even though this verse has dropped out of the perfect and eternal book, it is not dropped out of Islamic law. But actually, that is the story. According to a hadith, the penalty of stoning does not appear in the Quranic text now, but in the original Quran, it did appear. According to the Caliph Umar, the second successor of Muhammad as the leader of the Muslim community, the stoning for adulterers was originally in the Quran and had been practiced by Muhammad and was the will of Allah. And so he said he would not want people to think that because it was not in the Quran now, that it was not from Allah. Muhammad did it. It had been part of the Quran. and Muslims should stone adulterers. But that's essentially only applicable to women. The atmosphere is very different for men. If two men among you are guilty of lewdness, says the Quran, now this refers generally to homosexuality, punish them both. If they repent and amend, leave them alone. For Allah is oft returning, most merciful. That's chapter 4, verse 16. A very prominent commentary on the Quran, the Tafsir al-Jalalain, says that lewdness refers to men who commit fornication or sodomy. They are to be punished by cursing them and beating them with sandals. And if they repent of it and reform their behavior, leave them alone and do not harm them. However, men don't get off entirely scot-free. The commentary adds that this verse was abrogated by the prescribed punishment for fornication, that is, stoning. The Islamic jurist Ash-Shafi'i, it goes on, says that someone who's guilty of sodomy is not to be stoned, in his view, even if he has been married. Instead, he is to be flogged and banished. And so we see in Muslim countries, most of the time, when there is a stoning for adultery, it is women who are stoned to death. The Islamic Republic of Iran currently has as many as 8, maybe more, women on death row awaiting stoning for adultery, and no men. So while it does occasionally happen, at the same time, it is something that is decidedly anti-woman in application. And then, of course, there is the matter of covering. In his wildly praised and highly accommodationist June 4th, 2009 speech at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, reaching out to the Islamic world, Barack Obama said this: "I reject the view of some in the West that a woman who chooses to cover her hair is somehow less equal." He also noted that the U.S. government has gone to court to protect the right of women and girls to wear the hijab and to punish those who would deny it. Now, one may legitimately wonder, however, if Muslim women who wish to cover their heads in the United States really face the same kind of obstacles that both Muslim and non-Muslim women in the Islamic world often face when they refuse to cover their heads. As women's rights activist Phyllis Chesler notes, in Algeria, as in Iran, unveiled, educated, independent Algerian women have been seen as military targets and increasingly shot on sight. In February 2007, Zilla Huma Usman, the Pakistani government's minister for social welfare in Punjab province, was shot dead by a Muslim because her head was uncovered. The murderer, Muhammad Sarwar, declared, "I have no regrets. I just obeyed Allah's commandment. I will kill all those women who do not follow the right path if I am freed again." Allah's commandment comes in the Quranic injunction that women should draw their veils over their bosoms and not display their beauty except to their husbands, their fathers, their husbands' fathers, their sons, their husbands' sons, their brothers or their brothers' sons, or their sisters' sons, or their women, or the slaves whom their right hands possess, or male servants free of physical needs, or small children who have no sense of the shame of sex. That's chapter 24, verse 31. In other words, they should be covered whenever they venture out in public. Ibn Kathir explains that this is not a matter of choice. This, he says, is a command from Allah to the believing women, and jealousy on his part over the wives of his believing servants. It is also to distinguish the believing women from the women of the Jahiliyyah, that is, the society of unbelievers, and the deeds of the pagan women. But what exactly should they cover? The Tafsir al-Jalalain explains that this verse instructs women to cover everything except the face and hands when in public. In a hadith, Aisha recounts that Muhammad said that when a woman reaches the age of menstruation, it does not suit her that she displays her parts of body except this, and he pointed to her face and hands. Even today, some Muslims use this hadith to justify mandating the hijab for women. In another hadith, a woman with a veil over her face came to see Muhammad. She was looking for her son, who had been killed in battle. Muhammad asked her, "You have come here asking for your son while veiling your face?" She responded, "If I am afflicted with the loss of my son, I shall not suffer the loss of my modesty." Muhammad was pleased, and he told her, "You will get the reward of 2 martyrs for your son, because the people of the book have killed him." The same Quranic verse mandating that women veil themselves also says, "And let them not stamp their feet so as to reveal what they hide of their adornment." Ibn Kathir continues, during Jahiliyyah, when women walked in the street wearing anklets and no one could hear them, they would stamp their feet so that men could hear their anklets ringing. Allah forbade the believing women to do this. Furthermore, women are also prohibited from wearing scent and perfume while going outside the home, lest men should smell the perfume. Can't have that. Now, all this adds up to a systematic, intrinsic, endemic oppression of women in Islam. Women are essentially commodities and the possessions of men. They do not enjoy equality of rights. They can be divorced at will. They are not in a marriage relationship that is one of equals, but they are subject to polygamy and to this easy divorce. They can be beaten. Their testimony is devalued. In Islamic law, as officially codified, they are not to leave the home without permission from a male guardian. Although that is only enforced today in Saudi Arabia, it is nonetheless part of Islamic law. These things do not at all give a picture of women being given equality of rights. And so when we hear Islamic apologists in the West claiming that women are indeed given equality of rights, we have no choice but to think, are given equality of rights, we have no choice but to think that they are simply not being honest and are once again deceiving the unbelievers in order to foster the complacency of those unbelievers about the human rights abuses that are intrinsic within Islam. This has been the ABN Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer. Thank you for watching, and be sure to, in this holiday season, to contribute to ABN's ongoing mission and ministry. Thank you.